Ready? Good evening, everyone. My name is Georgina Jackson, and I'm the director of the Douglas Hyde Gallery of Contemporary Art. The Douglas Hyde is a space to see and learn about contemporary art. Through our artistic programme of new commissions and exhibitions, we bring the best of international contemporary art to Ireland and the best of Irish contemporary art to the world. As an organisation, we place artists at the centre of what we do, supporting them to be bold and produce their most ambitious work to date. We care deeply about bringing that work to a diverse and expanding audience. We present up to 8 exhibitions per year alongside off-site projects and a dedicated learning and engagement programme, all producing extraordinary and inspiring experiences. And all of our programme is free and everyone is welcome. This evening, we're delighted to welcome artist Eric and Mack back to Dublin to discuss his work in further detail in the context of his first solo exhibition in Ireland, titled Scampolo, or Remnant in Italian. Eric's exhibition is presented alongside Leslie Hewitt's work in and around Gallery 2 as part of the ongoing Artist's Eye series, which asks those exhibiting in Gallery 1 to invite an artist of influence to present their work in Gallery 2. The series acknowledges the crucial role artists play in influencing and shaping each other's practices and the conversations that emerge over a whole period of time. In this instalment, Eric has invited Leslie Hewitt. Both exhibitions are in their last few days, closing this Sunday, 29th of May. So a gentle reminder that if you haven't had a chance to come and see the exhibition, or if you want to come and see it again, we're open every day until Sunday, including Sunday, 12 until 5. And now to introducing Eric. Eric received his BFA from the Cooper Union and his MFA from Yale University. His work has been shown extensively internationally and has been the subject of numerous solo exhibitions, including NSU Art Museum in Florida, Scrap Metal Gallery in Toronto, the Power Station in Dallas, Brooklyn Museum in New York, Baltic Center for Contemporary Art in Gateshead, the Albright Knox in Buffalo, New York. And recent major group exhibitions include the Whitney Biennial in 2019, Desert X, Coachella Valley, and the Serpentine Gallery. He has completed a residency at the American Academy in Rome earlier this year, having been awarded the Philip Guston Rome Prize in 2021. And he was the recipient of the inaugural Baltic Artists Award and completed artist residencies at the Rauschenberg Residency, Captiva Island in Florida, and the Delphina Foundation in London. He has collaborated with designers Kiko Kostadinov and Grace Wales Bonner, along with the stylist Hayley Wallens, and lives and works in New York. Pushing the boundaries of painting an object, of art and fashion, Eric uses fabric, worn clothes, dye, blankets, paint, bleach, magazine cutouts, and photographs to create three-dimensional tactile assemblages in which colour, form, and line become both intimate and culturally significant. Working on site over 4 weeks this February, Eric has created an expansive new site-specific installation that tethers to the gallery's architecture and presents a series of movements through abstraction and colour and image for viewers. Before I start, I would like to thank a few people. So as a registered charity, we fundraise for our artistic programme and rely on the support of our friends and patrons. So thank you. You are essential to realising our programme and to enabling the continued support of artists. You can join as a friend today and become part of this vital community who champion contemporary art and embrace excellence, inquiry, and experimentation. To the Arts Council for their ongoing support of the Douglas Hyde, Trinity College Dublin, and our fantastic board. To everyone who's joined us this evening. To the wonderful team here at the Douglas Hyde, to Fernando, our great learning and engagement curator, Emma Moore, our gallery manager, our smart and friendly gallery assistants, Owen, Jen, Isadora, Shasha, Ashling, and our gallery technician, Paul McCrane. To the Irish Museum of Modern Art, and in particular Janice Hock for their support with Eric's production residency at the museum, and John and Ian from Marquee AV and Live Streaming Ireland, who are bringing this evening's talk to you onto your screens. But most importantly, a huge thank you to you, Eric, for this work, for your energy, your commitment, your patience, I think is another part of it. I first met Eric in New York in February 2020, and we agreed that he would come and do a residency here in Dublin and make new work. And obviously, many other things happened during that time. And for making this powerful body of work. So thank you so much. Welcome back to Dublin. It's good to see you back in the gallery.
Yeah, good to see you too. Of course.
So to begin the conversation, I'm going to ask you a number of kind of questions stepping into the practice and then the more specifics of the exhibition here at the gallery, Scampolo. And there will also be time for questions from the audience as well, both online and in person. So to begin, I wanted to talk to you about your relationship to painting. You refer to yourself as a painter, but your work pushes far beyond any singular frame. And it's very evident here as we sit kind of between the assemblages, we kind of get to have this unique position of kind of being placed within the work almost. And you also build artworks that very much bring forward personal associations and kind of recollections, whether or not that's through kind of certain fabrics or colors or textures as vehicle of light. And also this relationship with kind of opacity and translucency. And the idea of like gestures, weaves, drips, spreads, and the grid is also something that is apparent within the installation here, but is something that's very present within your work. There's also that idea of kind of the drip of coffee, this kind of act of mark making as being a part of kind of the history of painting and thinking about this aspect. But I suppose fundamentally we also return to the idea of a kind of contained structure and something that, you know, a piece of fabric, often canvas, that's kind of draped around a support structure that's then rendered invisible. Mm-hmm. And a kind of containment that occurs within that, or almost an exclusion of the world. And the term painter and the expanded history of painting is something that you do return to. And I suppose I was interested in what draws you to painting in its specificity, but also this idea of why it's so important to use the term painter, and then what are the limits of that term? I mean, it's a big question, but I think it's something that's very important to kind of tease out.
Definitely, yeah. I mean, so I think that painting, I began to think about that as like, as a kind of, I don't know, I was always surprised by like my attachment to painting because I thought that kind of objectively that sculpture was something that a medium I really was able to speak through. I mean, I'm thinking about, you know, my time in like arts high school and middle school and like making art for like that kind of stem from like diary entries and things like that. I think for something to have presence, especially at that time, it meant that it needed to have dimensionality and a kind of like, I don't know, maybe a kind of a metaphorical fullness that like kind of amounted in a massive something, a massive material. But like in moving towards, like through my education, I think painting became something more surprising. In this relationship to surface, I think was able to create some kind of interesting friction for myself. And I think it still kind of expresses itself as like a kind of friction with the medium and the staticness of the medium. I've always thought about painting as, like, I assumed that, you know, thinking about in like 2005 when I started undergrad, like that painting would have some kind of technological like advancement by 2022, you know, and I felt like at least kind of a kind of emotional relevant shift that would take place to be able to communicate feelings of the present, feelings of contemporary, like life, and I feel like that's really, I think painting has always been a interesting vehicle in that sense, but I think the way that I've kind of painting exists right now has to do with a kind of embodiment. Right now has to do with a kind of embodiment of principles and sensibilities that exist in materiality that have to do with light and color, perceptive boundaries, and the kind of, to really be able to key into some of the radicality involved with transgressing some of those conventions, like to be able to like look through a painting that has a hole in it, so that the status of its continuous like surface could be questioned. It maybe even have like be more useful, or maybe have a kind of possibility of transformation, either in its later state, or could anticipate an anticipation of some kind of change. So I started off thinking about, when I knew that painting was a place of question for me, I thought a lot about, like as we're saying, staining and color field painting, and like these points of abstraction that like really come from everyday life as a kind of tangible expression, kind of haptic knowledge. I think it's an important place to begin, because I think it kind of identifies some of the things at stake in the work, and it also gets under people's skin, and I think that's what good art's supposed to do a little bit, even if it like harkens back to some time in the 1970s where people were like Robert Rauschenberg and there's the Jammer series, and those are points of like real affirmation for me, but not. There's a number of people who like I feel like are my alibi to some of this exploration, but to kind of push past it and think about a space of embodiment.
And also the role of the body. I mean, I suppose maybe one way we can look at Rauschenberg, that series, Jammers in particular, as being these kind of process of experimentation. But I think there's also a really interesting relationship with kind of inclusion and exclusion to explore, and how within your work, there's always a kind of space made, kind of almost physically here in this particular position within the work. But I think the role of the body, the role of the viewer, the idea of there's kind of an invitation that exists continuously within the work to kind of feel that it occupies the same space as you, and your part, like that in some ways your presence is an activation, but also that you yourself become almost activated through the work.
Right. I think also it's really important for me, and that maybe this is not, I wonder if this is a painting thing or a sculpture thing, but I'm interested in the viewer's perception and less about mine. I think I can be the viewer, sure, but I think a lot of the nature of the materials being kind of external from my hand, some of these rough edges are straight up from the fabric shop. So, I'm like, this trace, like I need that to be a little bit contested. And that meaning of gesture, the the legibility of the gesture maybe ends up being a number of hands like kind of folded in, and yeah, I mean also in just I think in being a Black artist, I've always like in grad school and art school. I mean I felt like I was trying to open up the field for myself to be able to make a gesture and be able to call it what I think it is, and not have a kind of constant boomerang effect in which it automatically means like that it's about me. And I felt like that was like something that just never made sense to me, and why like my white peers could make work that was world building, and I was stuck to my own biography. Not even autobiography, but something somebody wrote for me, and I've been thinking a lot about this because it was there was a turning point at the end of undergrad where I was like, if this is the game, if this is going to be like that frustrating, then I need to be able to provide something in the work that I can give to myself, like this softness and sensuality and beauty in some conventional senses, and others like that it's like gone through these trials, and the remnant is something complex and radiant,
Which it reminds me, I think, in an earlier conversation that we were having, this idea of purposeless and purposeful. And I think you made this statement about how beauty is not futile, that the things that we talk about, who we are and the systems of value as a culture. And I think that kind of speaks to your point about the status of painting, the status of a relationship with an experience, but also your own position within that and your position within a broader, longer history.
Yes. Yeah, I mean, it's nice to be in at this point in time, because I also feel like there's all this like re-examination of artists artists that have come before me, that are like my elders, that like finally they're kind of able to have this kind of separation of self and in some ways, but it also there's things that are received in the present that define themselves and that are really political. I'm thinking about like Suzanne Jackson, I'm thinking about Sam Gilliam, Sanganugudi, like these and David Hammonds. I mean, these are artists that are able to like really, like they have a real contemporary lens, but some of that work is has this long trajectory, but this contemporary discovery of it. I don't know. And so there is something in between, like me as the maker and you as the viewer, and it is this fabric, it is this textile, and it's also something that's already in between us. It is the language of like the garment and the window dressing, the scrim and the theater. It's like all of these things, and and so like all of that language and that what's the word, like textuality, whatever, like that specificity, yeah, I mean, I want to, I use that. I use that, and, yeah.
And I think, I mean, this kind of continues your point. At the center of the work are linens, cottons, polyester, lace, each with their own production processes and kind of cultural markers as well. And I think that idea of the haptic that you've mentioned a few times in relation to the work is also important, right? Because that idea of touch, of kind of seeing a particular fabric and almost we have an understanding of how that feels against our skin, right? And a very different relationship to colour. That colour becomes something that becomes kind of animated in a different way. This idea then that also kind of hue and tonality are introduced by layers of specific colours, some of them taken from kind of high-end fashion, some from discount store fabrics. And it kind of reminds me of the idea that the origin of the word painter is also this idea of the old French word peinture, a place where one hangs clothes. And fashion obviously plays a huge role within your work. I think before you've referred to this idea that a single piece is an outfit, an installation is a closet, and a collage is the descendant of the mood board. And obviously you've collaborated with Kiko Kostadinov and Grace Wales Bonner alongside Haley. In many ways, textiles are a primary medium and the environment kind of becomes its support. And this maybe returns again to this idea of the painting and the support structure. And you've also described fashion as an access point to the work. Can you kind of further expand on this and then your interest in fashion, maybe?
Yeah.
And also in the way that, like, clothes come into the work. Like, obviously there's a shirt over there with your name on it that you made, and then in your exhibition in LA there was a series of shirts that were presented. So there also is these kind of handmade clothes that become part of the work in of itself.
The shirts came from like a exhibition, like, that basically produced, I selected all these fabrics. Many of the fabrics I dyed and bleached, and then took it to the seamstress, basically, to have these items, these garments be produced and made wearable. And it's kind of an interesting, like, kind of post-studio kind of gesture of, sending, like, just like letting somebody else kind of make some of the selections, and like that these are fragments that are sewn together to make something useful, but in themselves that there's depth in the surface, and through wearing it there be potentially more stains happen, you get sweaty, like all of those things, like the garment could be a vehicle for absorption, rather than a container. But yeah, I mean, my interest in fashion, I came from, I think it still comes from this feeling of being in like middle school, high school, and just dressing for like your own pleasure, but also understanding that people are going to be looking at you. My dad had a clothing store growing up, but it's kind of, I mean, we were talking last night, Alice, about our parents, like, how the presence of their like aesthetic identities, like how those things inform you, of course. But I feel like my parents both of them have such a relationship to art, and that being their vehicle to beauty, like just museums. My mom took me to museums growing up. And my dad worked at the National Gallery in DC, but he also had a clothing store. And so he would come up to New York and buy like clothing wholesale. And after a while, he just closed his store and opened up a moving truck. And he's a carpenter, so he like refurbished the moving truck with like wood paneling and carpeting, which is an indication of a particular time. But he turned it into a moving boutique in a way. Boutique's a really strong word for what this place was, because it was, like he was a plexiglass specialist. I mean, I say he was because he's retired now. But yeah, so there was like a lot of hard edges on the back of the truck. And me and my brother, we would be helping him, like, so he'll hit a speed bump and the clothes will fall off the rack. And we would have to run back there and like put them all up before the light turned green. But yeah, I mean, eventually my dad started, he would wonder what was really cool, what people were interested in. And that's something I've always like kind of paid attention to. I think I told you I would like dig in my older brother's closet for his clothes and wear them to the 6th grade. And I thought that was really cool. Oversized, that's what people are doing now. That's oversized, legit. But yeah, like, so my dad would sell like urban wear, be like a lot of like FUBU, Rocawear, and then at some point there were like kind of, I mean, it's hard to say that they were copies, but these bags, these women's bags, and eventually there's a lot of like, yeah, there's some things that just looked like not real. And I kind of became really good at like making that discerning decision.
Deciphering what's real and
this
what's
is
not
terrible. Real. This is really, like, how is this Chanel bag like threadbare? Like, it's just gonna fall apart. Anyway, but yeah, I mean, so like there's a part of that I was like, but also cable TV style network, like watching, I don't know, I'm a child of like cable television. So yeah, I saw my first runway show on TV, and I was like, this is crazy. Is this what people are wearing? Or is this what people are going to wear? And sometimes kind of, yeah, in some ways, and you would see these kinds of influences that people, like interpretations on like these runway shows, catwalk shows, like in everyday space, and I thought that was really fantastic. But the most important thing is that people would wear it, and that even some of the constrictions and the limitations of the clothes, that would be present in the way that people will wear it. And there's a possibility for styling to like make things either more or less wearable, more or less exposed, more or less vulnerable, more or less like with ease, ready to wear, yeah. So all of those things are like real notations in my head, and I'd never really understood why. And maybe those epiphanies happened around the same time with art. And so maybe that's why I don't like separate them, and then also like just kind of discerning what culture was to me. So yeah, like like Rockaware is owned by Jay-Z. And so all of a sudden, there's these like kind of dimensions of, you know, music and hip hop music, rap music, R&B, Vibe magazine, Source magazine. I mean, these end up being places that I like looked for images and just like looked in with wonder. And I still like, I'm just kind of astounded by those like the spaces of kind of documentation of that time, expressions of like style, self-possession, you know, FUBU as a place, as a brand that's for us, by us, as a concept that is really, really quite radical when there's, you know, after a time where what was really great was wearing Italian fashion, even in like in urban areas, in black neighborhoods, wearing Italian fashion, you know, as like a signifier of wealth. And I mean, we still see those cycles happen and whatever, in those points of hybridity. But yeah, anyway, those are like places that I understood what, like putting together concepts of what I believed was beautiful, and what what was kind of spectacular, and what needed to be looked at.
And it does, I suppose, that idea of the everyday or the kind of experiential within the work, you kind of include what you call everyday objects, whether or not that's images sourced from newspapers or magazines or ephemera, and sometimes like lists or drawings. But you also incorporate objects that are often unseen. And I know, obviously, the moving blanket, which is a blanket that, for those of you who don't know, within the art world, we use a lot to move objects, art objects, but also furniture and things. But it's also something that is overlooked or not considered to have any kind of status, I think, within the spaces that they're there. And you've kind of made the statement that there are a lot of things in our everyday that are structured to not be noticeable, and that I think they are things that speak about life. Why are you drawn to these objects? And then that kind of notion of, like, I suppose, like the invisible. And I think this is kind of accumulating these conversations in terms of your work.
Yeah, the moving blanket came as an epiphany and like a premonition in a way. I've used it many times, and it's maybe one of the closest things that I could call a series, space where a series can happen. And I think, there's, you know, this is like after, like just finding a surface material that had a frame. The frame reflected the softness of the like image area, and it wasn't like structurally soft. I mean, it was structurally soft. It wasn't structurally rigid, and it had like it visually there like signifiers of form that like basically the lines of the embroidered line and the moving blanket is a like visual movement. It's optical movement, and that for me, and it's transience. You pack it up, you know, and also just the fact that it wasn't all about art. You know, people use these things to, like, you know, wrap furniture and things like that. It just is really about a question of value in a very real way. And, you know, so much so that, like, I would be worried that a work would be thrown away. But that tension is so good. You know, that tension is, like, just right, where people be like, yeah, there's just this raggedy moving blanket. We're just gonna toss it out. I don't know where the artwork is, and it's like that's exactly what it is. So yeah, there's like real critique in that. I think assigning value, and it's just so interesting. I also thought it was like really a potent like fashion object that the moving blanket would surely be like poached by some like brand, as like a surface to use, turn into a jacket, because there's a way that the moving blanket also is just a quilt, in fact, that's just made like in a factory. And sometimes they have like these kind of matches, these juxtapositions of color, and it's really fantastic. But again, it's like, how is this something that it's not meant to be seen? How is this something that's not meant to be valued? And so, yeah, it was one of those specific material objects that I felt like really needed to be like defined a little bit more in the studio. And yeah, and surely, like with the fashion thing, I was like, oh, somebody's going to do this. Somebody's definitely going to do this, but I should do it first. And surely, yeah, Raph Simmons did something for when he did his Calvin Klein show, his Calvin Klein collection. He did like a series of moving blankets, very expensive obviously, but it's kind of punk because he's kind of punk, whatever. And also just a interesting interpretation on Americana, in New York, old New York, and like those kinds of things. So I thought that was really significant, but it also like kind of, they're kind of like little puffer, like they have plush, they're plush. There's things that are unseen about the moving blanket, and I thought that the softness as a structure, for that to communicate.
There's also kind of comfort, right? I think that idea of the quilt, we're kind of thinking about, again, the kind of touch.
Yeah, but they're very specific. It's very dire instances where you see people snuggling up with a moving blanket, So, I see them out in the street as a kind of, again, like a kind of protective kind of element from the concrete, people like with those things. And and really like the way that I define like an everyday object is literal. Like I like to think about it as a literalism on which these things would be reaffirmed every day. Like you'd see it multiple times, and therefore that defines itself as an everyday object. And so even within itself, within the image area of the moving blanket, the repetition of the line is the affirmation of the everyday in a way. And the grid is also an affirmation of the everyday. So, I think like I had to kind of decode that for myself, because it's something that, again, like people use so much it doesn't mean anything, really. So,
The title of this exhibition is Scampolo, or remnant in Italian. And obviously you were at the American Academy in Rome in advance of coming here to Dublin. Can you talk about the importance of this title, the idea of the remnant, but also I think this act of translation from Italian to English, and thinking about that as well?
Yeah, I think Scampolo, I like the way it sounds. I like the way it's spelled out. I've been going back and forth whether it's important for people to know the actual meaning of it. Because I just remember, like, again, it's like the instance and the epiphany of discovery in the everyday, where I'm just looking at these tags on these pieces of fabric in Rome, and the guys, the people who work there are super. They were kind of mean to me, you know. So I'm just like looking at them, like, okay, let me, whatever. But it says Scampolo, and it's just exactly what I'm looking for. It turns out, you know, I Google translated it. It's exactly what I'm looking for. They're just the leftovers, the little remnants, the look off-cut, the, you know, yeah. So, yeah, I kind of wanted that to be a place that everybody can have that kind of epiphany, and maybe in experiencing and discovering the work. Yeah. It's a really interesting place, I think. The space of like translation and understanding, and also thinking about the culture around like textile, the textile industry and fabric shops as a whole, and the garment district in New York, to, you know, the textile like shops in Rome, and then coming here and going to the linen weavers, but also seeing, coming to the fabric shops in Dublin. I found like a remnant like bin at the fabric store here, and I felt like that was also just like really productive. And yeah, I think having been in Rome, this show in a way is just processing that time, even though there's no direct material that literally carry over from that space. And yeah, I mean, I think, this conceptually kind of completes a thought, or like at least is lining up to complete a thought around that time, but using the space. So there's some interesting juxtaposition that really define this as like an act of artwork, you know, and as it would be contained in the gallery in this architecture. With, again, the concrete and the concrete and the steel and the glass, and that is like a basis to begin a kind of intervention.
And you also kind of set yourself, I mean, for those of you who don't know, Eric did a site visit in December of last year, and obviously we shared images of the gallery prior to that, but then came in kind of early February and spent a month like using the gallery space as a studio space, but also you set yourself a number of kind of rules almost, right? Like you didn't bring material or objects from Italy to here, which is where you were kind of coming from, but actually kind of spent time going to visit Emblem Weavers in Wexford, which is the only kind of existing remaining linen producers in the south of Ireland, but also visiting these fabric stores or fabric shops across Dublin. And I suppose, like you've talked about this idea of the exhibition as a container, but I think there's also this kind of liveliness that has occurred in working with the architecture in this space. And it's a very unique space in many ways, because you kind of come in at one level and then descend into the gallery space and have these different, I suppose, like vistas or viewing points. I'm kind of interested in your approach of like your kind of, I suppose, like maybe expectations of the space, and also the expectations that you had of yourself in terms of working here. It's maybe a tough question, I don't know.
I mean, yeah. So I think I made some decisions, and maybe they show up as rules in hindsight. But I wanted there to be a kind of ease to this exhibition, especially in like being here for such a long time. That there, like with ease, there can be just a kind of a really productive accumulation here, and that the work does not have to be estranged from the space, that it can really know it and know all the ways, the best angles that that these works could be experienced, and that there is not this estrangement factor that would create a kind of jarring situation and the kind of otherness that like I not planning for, you know. So I wanted to know the like kind of intricacies of the space, the architecture, these like kind of gaps, these intentional gaps. Like I feel like, you know, I had to speak with the building or something before I could really begin, and just to think about what it would mean to kind of reframe the experience of the viewer being in the space. So I mean, I looked at a lot of images, and that's really helpful, but it's generally never exactly what I'm like looking for.
Because you looked at a lot of the exhibition archive of the gallery, exactly. And how different artists
and how many times the space has changed and been altered, and as it's been altered, it's like moves closer and closer to like a white cube, you know, without seams, without, you know, a kind of like self-referential like space in a way. And then there's these kind of points that defy it, like with the windows that are like these slivers, and these gaps in between the top floor and the bottom floor, and you know, things like that. So I mean, to think about space in a way that didn't feel like a kind of rushed viewing, I think is super important, and that there are spaces of possibility that are architected and built in, and not as like kind of empty points of communication, but like opportunities to see things differently, and think that's really unique, especially for an art space, an art gallery, art museum, and for that matter, you know, just like these, really specific like signifiers, like just, you know, the way things are built, and so it kind of allowed me to think about the way that I wanted to build something, you know.
I'm just going to do a quick check on the time. Okay. I might open it up to questions shortly now, so prepare yourselves. That idea of kind of support structures, I suppose it goes back to this idea of this gallery space. I also think about this building was built in 1978, and there was a real time given towards building at that point. Like we had an engineer who was involved in building the spiral staircase and talking about this idea of every step was poured in one day and then had to lay and sit before they could pour the next step the next day. And this idea of kind of a passage of time, but also a kind of embeddedness of support structures and how they kind of come to being. And support structures are also important within your work in terms of I'm thinking about the kind of like exterior umbrella stands that you've used where you've removed the kind of umbrella surface, or that idea of the flagpole as well, which was in the piece Landlord that you did last year in Willa Cooper Gallery in New York. And here in the gallery, we also have these series of bamboo pieces that are tied together and almost like at a distance from a number of the works. And they kind of almost falter, but they kind of extend beyond their capacity at the same time. There's an interesting tension, I think, that occurs there. I suppose how within these support structures, there's ideas of hierarchies of like private and public and personal and emotive, and also that idea of kind of hidden spaces that play out in these inclusions. And maybe it goes back to this question of kind of value and systems of value that I think is something that is very much a kind of line throughout your work, and thinking about how we come to value certain things. And I think you made the statement about how the art object at its most sacred should reflect altered systems of values, especially in observation of the world's brutalities. It's a big question. but in terms of this idea of, I suppose, like support structures, the things that surround and are maybe not as visible or not as included in some ways, as well as that idea of kind of systems of value, how these things are developed within the work, or how you, I suppose, that idea of the support structure particularly. I don't know if there is an actual question there.
Oh, okay, I think. So yeah, I mean, I had this thought, and when you were speaking, I was like, oh yeah, like, let's talk about the umbrellas. I think that the umbrella is it's another recurring everyday object that I think alludes to, for me, like a personal architecture, a singular architecture, like even more expansive than like the use of like the brim of a hat or something, but it actually is like this, in a way, a kind of temporal shelter. The fact that it also collapses in like the fold, the compression and the expansion, I think has this amazing potential, and because of its like varied identity, like it ends up being just such a interesting object to me. Yeah, the idea of personal architecture, that those things, again, is like a kind of technology, to shield you from the rain, but also be allowed to like move. You'd be able to, you held by one hand. I think that there's something like really significant about that, and to extend that into more spatial kind of grounding context ends up feeling very natural for me, to extend the fabric, for there to be like maybe too much fabric, but that structure being so finite, finite and also varied, I think is always been a kind of interesting challenge for me. Yeah, the point of like personal architecture is like this thing, like this singularity. I think that that's really what I think about as like a defined sense of what fashion is really like this communication of the garment, and that it does it has such a significance that like kind of goes beyond a coverage, but that it could actually do many things as a kind of extension of the body, and as within use. That like maybe has yet to be seen, or we can all anticipate. But yeah, I feel like that those ideas, I think, definitely belong in the room. And yeah, I do. I mean, I think as I move within the work, architecture is becoming more of a pronounced kind of facet, and not just the architecture of like exhibition space, but like in terms of a dwelling, or
The idea of shelter as well is something. I mean, I think that kind of relates very much to the image that you've used of Alvin Baltrop's
Yes.
from that scene, where you have a houseless man kind of creating their own form of shelter, but also,
yes.
the experiences within this space.
Yeah, I mean, I feel like that image is such a like a beautiful. I don't know. I mean, it's a beautiful image, but it's also, I think there's some interesting metaphor within that, or just like depth within that is mined, whether you see that image or not, if that makes sense. Yeah, like kind of restructuring sensibilities and really thinking about essential forms of value within a space that's supposed to be no space at all. Like, how do you begin to structure a place for yourself? Yeah, I'm thinking like the bamboo is kind of, I mean, I feel like it's enough of a loaded material that's structural, but it almost taunts the freedom of like the fabric itself. So it's like kind of imposes itself as like it's supposed to be the structure, used as a structure, but it actually unto itself is enough of a form, and allows for the fabric to actually be free and express itself within its own rules, within its own like kind of structural flow. Yeah. Yeah.
Yep.
Okay.
Thanks. I don't know if we have any questions from the audience.
Sure.
Thank you. Oh, I feel so professional. Just like walking around the gallery, I'm kind of curious about the like individual fabrics. Like I love these kind of like sheer, colorful ones, and then these ones, and the like hair-like feathery ones. And I was wondering if you like remembered where you got the individual fabrics, like which ones are from Wexford or which ones are from Dublin, and then like where all these like little scrap-like ones came from.
Definitely, yeah. I mean, yeah, everything was purchased here, and I mean, and it's interesting because this fabric is fabric that I would use in New York, going to Mood Fabrics, and just like it ends up being a real base for many of my works in recent years, and mostly because its transparency, its softness, its color, its the way it catches light, and it's like possibility for layering. So that's something that is definitely, it was purchased here factually, but I've definitely found this fabric in many of these colors. Just the same in New York, which I think is interesting. I think that that's a really interesting point. Like just that like textile as a common language in internationally in a way. And yeah, I mean, and when we went to Wexford to meet the emblem weavers. Yeah, I mean, they talked about like this process of, I think rolling the warp, and that, a lot of the yarn that they use is actually not made in Dublin. It's made maybe in India or, do you say Belgium? I don't know, whatever. But just to say that there are these gestures, and that the labor of uniting these things is super powerful, and of being like emblematic of cultural identity, and thinking about how recognizable and legible the plaid is, as not just an Irish signifier, but British, Scottish, even Indian in some cases. So there's something about in the detail, and it's something about the color, it's something about the weight, and so the hair like material is actually just I think the warp, like ready to be like ready to receive the other line. Was it the warp and the web, whatever, so it's about to be, but it just is like the straight line, and I was like, this looks so much like hair bundles, and the colors, like for me to layer them myself would, it's just really gestural, and then works like in an interesting way with the stairs as a kind of gridding device, or like some repetition. And so like all of the plaid that you see, especially the remnant on the ground, the collection of the collection of cloth is from Emblem. And there's, I think, TWI here in Dublin, and like I kind of just went around to like a number of places, and found some really interesting things that I think communicated to me. I've been thinking a lot about like nature as like a kind of a pictorial element. Yeah, I'm like talking too long. Anyway, so thank you for that.
Hi.
Hey.
Hey. You kind of answered one of my questions. I was going to ask you about the textiles being like a fabric text-based document of a place, right? And so you really kind of like, went into that. But I have a few questions. I was wondering if, since you mentioned that, if you think about that from place to place to place, as you sort of, do your sort of gathering of materials and visiting people and places, it's kind of like it's a finding mission, but also kind of like anthropological in a way. And if you compare and keep track of this thing from place to place to place where you build your installations.
Yeah. Well, yeah, I mean, I'm not very organized, but I usually can remember where I get things from. I also do. I mean, this show is a little bit of an outlier, also in the way that I usually don't like. I like the materials to be from various places. Therefore, it doesn't have to speak about, it doesn't have to factually be made by that place or like have that kind of meaning, the weighted meaning. So this is, in a number of ways, a kind of experiment, material experiment. And yeah, I think it is a really, I generally try to kind of, I feel like I take the same kind of principles no matter where I go and kind of like see if how those things manifest in different spaces, different like locations, different cities. So, and they just go back to the studio.
Okay, question number 2.
Okay.
I'm kind of always thinking about the interior space. So if this question doesn't like apply, just be like, I don't be thinking about like that. But I was thinking about like the sort of the process of the choice of the material, right? Like you're drawn to a particular reason. Like I'm wondering if this is any indication like of an internal state, like the combination of textures, and this particular. Because you said you were processing, a previous experience. So I was just wondering if there's any correlation between like even the sort of like the brightness of the colors, if there's any kind of inner change, like if this in any way, even during or after, represents any sort of like, oh, okay, I'm drawn to this, but maybe because of X, Y, and Z also. Like is that part of your process?
Yeah, Yeah, I think at first, I considered a very specific color. Like I was thinking about like red as a way of like just kind of piercing into the space and like kind of igniting the material. Just thinking about what the best vehicle for that would be. But then, I love the space of like I don't know. I don't want to say it. I love to go shopping. But those are spaces of real thought. No matter where you are. You know about that. Just you're at Whole Foods and you're like, oh right, like mango. And like that's what maybe the space needs. This color. Any place can be a kind of space for epiphany. But I think emotionally or like within myself, like this kind of radiance, an enduring radiance. Like those are things that are like kind of lessons for me and reminders within the work. Even within like having its own kind of varied sense of light, but that color would kind of be able to cut through some of the in between spaces when you can't tell from the floor to the wall, or these are markers of space and distance, and time. But yeah. I think, yeah.
Okay. Last question. Okay. Are we out of time? No. We're out of time. No. Okay. Last question.
Okay.
Okay. So. Okay, so last question. So the work has this sort of like performative quality. Also gives me dance, and I was thinking dance, because it's like leaping. It feels like it's leaping, and lunging, and plunging, and laying. Like it just feels like choreography. And then my eye shot over there and saw this image of this. It's like a. It's from a magazine, but it looks like a dancer. It could be a model, but in sort of like a dance kind of lifted up pose. And so I was thinking about the use of like the sort of like metaphor and then inferring movement, but also actually using imagery, like very concrete imagery, like behind the works to kind of like also like gesture towards gesture and stillness and movement. And I just wanted to, I guess, know more about that combination, that relationship in this particular exhibition of the static images supporting or juxtaposed against like the flight.
Yeah. I think, what you said about stillness and movement is definitely the things that I've been thinking a lot about, and how important stillness is, because I think it may be less. It's one of my least favorite things about painting, being still and inert and static. Like I'm like, oh, it should just shake or something, or like, at least I know what I'm supposed to feel when I'm looking at it, or that it should do that. Some paintings should shake. I don't know, you know what I mean? But yeah, I think the kind of focus on these still images, that there's, I think it kind of gives the movement of the works in the space even more play, to have those kinds of contrasting elements, I think that was my thought process around it. Especially there's so many of these images are so staged, and so yeah, there's to at least have to deal with a very real obstructing factor as a true framing device. Like I don't know, like watching something. Watching something on 125th, and then there's a ton of people that like walk past you, walk through it, just like, but you're trying to like focus. And I feel like that is actually a very real moment, that the work can also frame the work, and yeah. There's a bunch of other things I want to say about that, but yeah, I think.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, thank you. Okay.
Hello.
Hi.
So, I see a really strong connection and relation between the hair of the woman in that picture and that fabric. This means something, or it's just in my head, or can you explain me?
You're talking about the hair? The hair looks like hair?
The hair of that woman and that fabric over there, this fabric here.
Oh, yeah.
Is on purpose, or?
So, okay, what fabric are you talking about? The brown fabric?
It seems
What's
like
the color?
hair, like
I think the threads.
The hair.
The
The
threads.
threads.
And the circle.
Yeah. Yeah, definitely.
I see like a relation and a connection, right?
Yes.
Is this on purpose, or?
Yes.
Can you explain me a bit?
Yes.
If there is an explanation, maybe.
What'd you say?
Maybe it's not any explanation, just.
No, I think I can speak to it. You know, like, I like the choreography. That's a thing that I think about with the works, especially in like their like how they're restated, how they're like installed over time. Like they have to hit a particular mark in order for them to be the artwork. But it's also interesting to think about its relationship to the wall. That there's this kind of obstructing gesture. I'm thinking about like this kind of the work itself in the space as like a kind of conduit from the wall and the architecture, and maybe even the view and maybe even the body as well. You know, and so like these kinds of extensions, like literal like extensions of the hair. I mean, I see that as like they are extensions of the body, and that those things are kind of the space in between the body and architecture. You know, does that make sense? Okay. Yeah. Right. Okay.
I think we may have reached the end of time. the end of the.
Okay.
Thank you so much, Eric. That was fascinating. It was really great. Thank you so much for joining us. And yeah, just a reminder that the exhibition is open for 3 more days. And yeah, thank you, Eric. It's been brilliant.
Really appreciate being here and and doing this show. Wow.
I feel like we need a glass of champagne now to toast, but yeah.
Yes, we do.
Okay, we're gonna go.
Yeah.
Thank you.